national Sons of Utah Pioneers. So if you have any questions, he ought to be able to answer them. That's putting you on the spot, isn't it? His wife's name is Kathy. They have 4 daughters and 11 grandchildren. He is a dentist in Holiday, and he is going to speak tonight on family history and the library at the Sons of Utah Pioneers, and how they can help us with our family history and serve us in other ways other than just have the national chapter for us. I'll turn the time over to Tony.
Thank you. I've got some slides, and you guys may not be able to see it over here. Do you guys want to move over later on? Does that work? Or whatever. If we move this, maybe you can see the screen.
You decide.
How should I do this? I don't know where to stand.
You can sit, you can stand, you're fine.
I'll put that there.
No, I'm fine.
Would this be better to bring underneath?
You got it.
Does that work? This is cool though. No cords. That's really good. I really don't know where to stand. I'm going to stand right here if that thing will reach. Is that okay? Does that work? This may not be long enough. Got to have guts to try high tech here. There we go. Yeah, let's turn the lights off if we want. Nope, it's not going to reach. Tell you what, should I sit? I guess you guys don't need to see me, do you? No?
Can't see in the dark.
Okay. Well, this will be fun. Let's see. Like that. There we go. Okay. Okay, thank you for having me. I gave this presentation a couple of days ago at the Holiday chapter, and it just seemed to work fairly well, I thought, and I hope it works as well here. Again, my name's Tony Tidwell. I just got put in September as the new president. We are now going from September to September. I hope each of you make plans this next year to go to the encampment up in Logan. That's when we have our big national meeting, and that's when we transfer the baton, and that's when I can relax. So this next year, it's my baby, and I'm honored to be in your service, and I hope we can help this organization grow and get some real excitement in it. You know, we're making incredible progress. I hope each of you are kind of keeping up with what's going on in National. Everyone gets the Pioneer magazine. If you haven't noticed this last couple of years, it has just absolutely become one of the most quality magazines in the country, and it's being recognized as such. And I would hope that you really make it part of your study every month. This next one that's coming out is about the Utah War, and this one I brought was about the Mormon Battalion. The one this last month was on Bountiful, Davis County. I thought it was fantastic. The one before that was about the colonies down in Mexico. Fantastic. It taught me more things than I thought I knew more about it than I did. And so I hope each of you are using this use this. This is my stocking stuffer. I don't know how many kids each of you have, but for 25 bucks, 35 bucks if you want to make them a sustaining member, but for 25 bucks they can get a subscription. This is my stocking stuffer. And I just think it's one of the best gifts I could give my children, is to help them understand their heritage. And it opens up conversations for me to talk about my family's heritage and where they are involved in this. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. So hold on to your hats, and I want to talk about a few things here. I grew up in Tennessee, but all my family's out here. And I had no idea what a rich heritage I came from. I found out by doing the count just a few weeks ago. I realized I have 38 relatives that walked and came out before the railroad. I only had one of these people up at the very, well, it's not even there. If you look at this very top row, I only have one set that didn't come before the railroad. And that one came to escape Hitler from Germany. Still it's still in the early 1900s. So I'm very proud of my heritage, and I hope I can get you excited about studying yours. Francis Bacon said that famous families are like potato plants. The best parts are underground. And I agree with that, but I'm still very proud of mine. I've got relatives like Parley P. Pratt, Anson Call. There's Anson Call. I don't know if you know the history of Anson. We'll talk a little about him. If you go over here to the Taylor side, there's President John Taylor's a great-grandpa. I mean, it's a rich heritage, but the ones I'm most proud about are some other ones. So I want to first start talking about and show you one thing. When I was a young boy, my grandpa passed away, and my grandmother came to live in the house next door to us. And as soon as I got off my mission, right before I went off to college, I knew I needed to get as much information from Grandma as I could. Grandma is the granddaughter of John Taylor, and the daughter of John W. Taylor. Let me pull him up there. There's John W. Now, John W.'s got a rich history, but Grandma was born down in the colonies down in Mexico. I realized I'm half Mexican. I didn't realize my grandma and grandpa on my mom's side are from Mexico. And I wanted to get as much information from her as I possibly could, and I spent a whole week just gleaning stories, and she was so excited to share that with her grandson that at the end of the week she called her children and told them what she decided to do, and she skipped her children and gave me all her genealogy, her pictures, and she gave me her dad's briefcase from Mexico. You know? And what a treasured legacy it is to be entrusted with those sacred memories of hers. And remember, back then was before computers, and it was the record. It was the record with the photos and things. So I kind of became the repository of those sacred records of our family. I spent a summer with my little brother down in Tennessee when I was going through dental school. Yes, we're good, thank you. My wife was in Salt Lake during the summer, and my brother and I were working our tails off just trying to make enough money for rent and tuition. And we copied every pedigree chart that my grandma had, and on both sides, and we came up with 100 pedigree charts. I mean, that's a lot to type out, and all the history. And then computers. A few years later, computers came out, and I had to retype every bit of it again into the computer, right? And I had this disc, and I took it down to Salt Lake and says, here's my 20 generations, you know, here's my record. And they said, thank you, but we need you to verify every date with 2 verifications. And I go, thank you, goodbye. Right? Has anyone had And I mean, it was so overwhelming to me what they expected. But now, I mean, if any of you have been on the internet lately and gone to Family Search and looked up your genealogy, it is the most marvelous, wonderful, simple way of doing your history. I mean, my dad used to get up every morning and get 5 names temple ready before he'd leave his bedroom. And once he did that, he'd go play online poker. I don't know how he never bet a dime, but that's what he liked to do. He loved genealogy, and I think that's where I got this love from him. Let's talk about, my grandma talked about her dad, and this is John Whitaker Taylor. Does anyone recognize that name? John W.? John W. was called to be an apostle. If you go over here to memories, there's incredible pictures. And here is the 12 apostles. And my grandpa is the second one from on the back with the dark mustache. That's John W. John W., there's a lot of interesting stories. And one, my grandma was sworn to secrecy to never talk about polygamy. And that's the only thing she would not talk about. I was as naive about all this as anything. And it wasn't until later that I realized that her brother is Sam Taylor, who's an author. He actually wrote Son of Flubber. You know, you ever heard that silly show? But he was a very good church historian. And he did talk about genealogy, about polygamy, and Grandma called him the black sheep of the family because he broke that covenant. But I found out more about Grandpa Taylor. John W., there's family lore and there's church history. And sometimes understanding that sometimes we do that which we must to build the kingdom. In 1905, John Taylor with the 12, this is the family story. We're in the temple, and John W. stood up and said, "Brethren, the federal government is confiscating all our property. They're searching for everyone that's polygamist, and we have got a manifesto." Now, he personally felt that the manifesto was only for America. Does that make sense? The governing the law of the land. And so he did take some extra wives, including my grandma. Took my great-grandma, as a plural wife after the first manifesto. He married Rhoda and Roxy Wellings. And they were part of the underground down in Mexico. They couldn't even use their real name down there, but people knew who they were. And anyway, he had taken a plural wife, and so he's in the temple with the 12, and he says, "Brethren, the only way they're going to believe us is if you excommunicate me for polygamy." And then Matthias Cowley stood up and said, "Brethren, if you excommunicate John W., they may believe us. But if you do both of us, they have to believe us." And that's the last time, until 2 years ago, that they had to replace 3 apostles, is when John W. and Matthias Cowley were removed from the 12 apostles. Matthias was disfellowship, and 5 years later they had a church court on John W., and they actually excommunicated Grandpa from the church. Immediately, as soon as he was let go from the 12, his business, his friends, and everyone abandoned him, and he lived they had a very, very difficult time. But they knew the challenges that they were going to face, and he was willing to endure them. And to his dying day, he always said, "Follow the prophet." And he raised children, many children, that each understand and have not faltered from their faith. Do you understand what this does to a young boy when he reads, to a descendant, when they read stories like this? Do you understand that it makes us say, sometimes there's more to it than that. Sometimes we ask ourselves, could Grandpa be wrong? Right? But at the same time, you recognize their reasons for doing things, and I think it makes a person more understanding on both sides of every issue, and not quick to judge. And if I can learn that one rule, I think it was worth the research. To kind of verify the family part of this, in 1965, my uncle went to Marky Peterson and said, you know the promises that were made. It's time to fulfill them. And in 65, the prophet went to the temple and had John W. Taylor's his membership and his apostleship restored. And so I think that helps the family feel a little bit better without having to. Anyway, but I think it's a great story, isn't it? I love it. That's John W.
Can I ask you
Please.
if they did that to Lot and men, or was it just because he was an apostle?
They needed an example made because he was an apostle. They did not do it to other people. They actually let him go for 5 years, 6 years. And then they had the second manifesto that said, made it very clear that the church as a whole will not practice polygamy, and they needed someone, and that's how the church needed to handle this. Does that make sense? And you can read the records. It's kind of interesting. I just read the funeral of John W. Taylor. It's the first time all 6 of his wives were in the same room together. They'd never met all at the same time. One was Canadian and lived up in Cardston. 2 lived down in Mexico. A few were up in Bountiful. And anyway, it was kind of interesting. But can you imagine a funeral where the church is there and nothing can be said about him being an apostle? All the platitudes are so empty. You know, how do you promise him a life after this or anything like that? And it became such an absurd circus. They said when the last person said the closing prayer, his dentures were loose and he was whistling. And finally, one of the uncles just started cracking up, and before they're done, all 6 of the widows and everyone was just having they just couldn't handle it. The farce was just that bad. It wasn't until the youngest wife died a few years later that they were actually able to have a funeral that was meaningful. And I thought that was an interesting story. Okay, I didn't mean to go that long with John W., but it's a great one, isn't it? You know, here's one, Jonathan Harriman Holmes. Jonathan Harriman was a bodyguard to the prophet, and he married Elvira Cowley, and then a few months later the prophet was sealed to her as a plural wife. A few months afterward, and it was an interesting. We don't understand it, and I don't pretend to, but that's the record. And he was faithful to the end. He was one of the pallbearers for Joseph at his funeral, and then he continued to took Elvira as his only wife afterwards. And his 3 daughters, all 3 of his daughters married Job Welling. And see if I can find that picture. Yeah. And all 3 of his daughters married Job Welling. Job Welling, his first wife, Frances, passed away soon after coming to the valley, and they actually lost 1 child in the process of coming across. And then he settled in Lehigh, and then took my grandma first, and then a few years later married the sisters before going on a mission. And you know, I don't know if your families have made comments about polygamy, but not one of my ancestors. I read all their records, and they always felt so blessed to be able to live that sacred law. And so it makes me very tender for those who are willing to live that they consider a higher law. And anyway, in the midst of a lot of persecution, knowing beforehand that they were going to have those type of challenges. Again, Anson Call, this Cyril Call, I don't know how he lost his eye. I think it's a great picture of him. But Oops, let's go back.
Cyril.
Yeah, Cyril was, Anson calls Dad. He was attacked by the mob, and the mob said, you know, we don't have anything against you personally, but we can't stomach those Mormons. You have 2 minutes to get your belongings out of your cabin. Took the bed and as much belongings as they could, and they burned his cabin to the ground. And Anson, what a great pioneer this Anson is. I don't know if many people know much about Anson, but this man, it doesn't let me do this. That's interesting. If I can stay on this page. Anson was a great pioneer. One time he had gone to the Masonic Lodge with Joseph and Hiram. Hiram was going to do a Masonic rite, and Joseph wasn't allowed. Joseph wasn't part of the Masons at the time, and he was outside the lodge and talking to the people, and he went into a vision, and actually wrote that down. I think it'd be worth reading if you'd like. I hope this is what you want to hear. Anson described the incident, and Joseph, he said, I had before seen Joseph in a vision, and now saw, while he was talking, his countenance changed to white, not the deadly white of a bloodless face, but a living, brilliant white. He seemed absorbed in gazing at something at a great distance, and said, I am gazing at the valley of the mountains. Then the prophet gave a vivid description of the scenery of the mountains and valleys, just as many of those who listened to him afterwards learned to know them in reality. Pointing to Brother Rowdy, he said, there are some men here who shall do a great work in the land. Then pointing to Brother Call, he said, there is Anson. He shall go and shall assist in the building of cities from one end of the country to the other. And you, talking to everyone, shall perform a great work that shall be done by men, so that the nations of the earth shall be astonished, and many of them will be gathered in that land and assist in the building of cities and temples, and Israel shall be made to rejoice. Anson fulfilled that great calling. I don't know if you know, he settled a town called Callsville. Remember Call's Landing? They used to be able to bring steamboats up to Call's Landing and then into Salt Lake. A couple of years later, the railroad came through and Callsville was no more. He also helped settle places up in Canada. He did some stuff out in, anyway, he was a great settler. I personally suspect that Anson Call would have been an apostle, but he had a terrible stutter. And he was given a blessing by Brother Richards, but it was only that whenever he was preaching the gospel, he would not stutter. Any other time, he had quite a bad speech impediment, and I think that's kind of interesting. He married Margaret Unwin. Margaret Unwin. He met Margaret when he went to rescue the Martin Handcart Company. He was one of the main wagons that went to rescue them, and Margaret Unwin had come over on the Hudson and was on the Martin Handcart Company. And when Anson found her, she was sitting in a wagon gnawing on a piece of frozen summer squash that was only good for the cattle. And he knew, and she wasn't complaining about cold, so he knew that she was freezing to death. She said that he handled her quite roughly and made her walk up and down the camp until her circulation started. She did lose a few toes when she got back to Salt Lake, and Anson took her as a plural wife. And it was a wonderful relationship. She lived to be quite elderly, and anyway. Anson, anyway, just a great history. Okay, one more great story. Kathy, can you turn on your hotspot? Because I'm not getting any internet. I forgot to ask them about the internet. They said they'd give me the code, and I never asked. That's why I'm not getting the pictures I'm looking for.
My family is from Omer Call.
Omer, yes, yeah, one of Anson's kids, yeah.
No, it was from his youngest brother.
Oh, is he?
Cyril.
Oh, so he's a brother to Anson?
Yeah, he
Okay.
was the youngest, they were twins.
Oh, very good, very good.
Yeah, Tony, if you remember, you and I were relatives, very close.
You admit that?
We were random up at Bear Lake.
That's right. Isn't that great? Have you ever done that on your phones to see relatives that are close? Family search is a miracle, and I hope everyone uses it.
We had calls up in Idaho.
Yeah?
So spring,
Uh-huh.
one of the son, sort of flying J.
Oh, yes, yeah, Jay Call, yes. I was invited to his funeral, but I never knew him, so it's nice to say I could. Let's see if this works. It works. Okay, we have internet. I want to tell you about Carl Heinrich Wilken. What an incredible person this is. Again, if you guys coming up, you're going to get an article. It's not in the article, but this next issue, which comes out in about a week and a half, will be about the Utah War. This is 1857. Remember, General Johnston Army came out from Fort Leavenworth, and anyway, came from back east, and to put down the Mormon rebellion. I had a great-grandpa, Carl Heinrich Wilken. Let's see if I can find his memories. Carl Heinrich was born in Germany. He was a Prussian soldier, and he fought in a war against the Danes. There was a war against the Danes, and his company, all his senior officers had been killed in 3 previous charges against the enemy. And they were going to capitulate. They were going to quit. And he encouraged his troops to let's make one more charge. Let's make one more charge against the Danes. And he led the charge. And with his enthusiasm and his skills, they routed the enemy soundly and won the battle. And a year later, the Danes actually won the war. But the king was so impressed with Carl Heinrich. This guy was 6'3" and a soldier, that the king he received the German Iron Cross. And there's a cool picture here of Carl Heinrich in his Iron Cross. If I can find it. Here it is. Let's see if that works. Yeah. There's Carl Heinrich with the Iron Cross. That Iron Cross is made from a captured cannon. It's always from a captured cannon from the enemy. I thought that's cool. Anyway, and the king was so impressed that he wanted to be part of his royal guard and be a bodyguard to the king of Germany. But Carl did not want to be a soldier. His 2 brothers had already immigrated down to South America, and so Carl left my great-grandma and their two daughters and jumped on a ship to go to leave. He had heard rumors that the king was going to call him to service. So he got on a ship and took off. He either ran out of money or he took the wrong boat, but he found himself in New York, not able to speak the language, out of money, and unable to get a job. And so so being a soldier, right? Let's see if I can do this. So being a soldier, Carl joined the military and joined the, let's see if I can do that. There we go. He joined the military, U.S. Army, as a soldier, and guess who he ended up with? He ended up, bingo, he in Johnston's army. And so he came out with Johnston's army in '57 to put down those Mormon rebellion. He didn't know, he actually thought that the Mormons could have been a tribe of Indians. That's how little he understood. And as he started to get to know the troops, he said they were the most nasty, undisciplined, coarse, crude people he's ever been associated with. He's used to this very rigid military, type of soldiering, and these were a mob, he said. They knew they were coming out to kill the Mormon men and take everything they had. That was their plan. And it just disgusted him. He got as far as Wyoming, and he decided he was going to desert. Twice he went out on horseback By the way, because he was such a good soldier, and one of the head of the cannon company was German descent too, they got along quite well, and he had special privileges. He was allowed to go out and go hunting for the troops, and so he twice he went out on horseback to go to desert, and twice he heard his real name said, and he wasn't using his own name, and no one knew his name. And it scared him so much that every time he would turn the horse to leave, he would hear his name, and it made him stop. And finally, he found out later that if he had gone any further, he would have been captured for desertion. Then finally one day he asked permission to go hunting, and he took off. And when he did, he found the first trapper he came across. He turned himself over to him, and the man said, "I heard a noise." And I turned quickly, and the man was this soldier was standing there, and he said, I leveled my gun at his heart, and he said, "Do not shoot, I am unarmed." Anyway, he turned himself in to Brother Lyman, a Mormon trapper hunting rabbits. And Lyman took him down to Fort Bridger and turned him over to who else but Porter Rockwell. Isn't that great? And Carl, he had a lot of information. He still didn't know if these Mormons were following some crazy lunatic. He didn't know that much about them. But he did know that these brethren took a knee morning and night and were constantly, their language was pure. They lived a life that was admirable, and he noticed that almost immediately. And he decided to help Porter herd 153 head of U.S. grade cattle from the military all the way into Salt Lake. And he said as he crested the mountains and saw this beautiful valley, the Mormons were going to give him free passage to California. But when he crested the valley and saw this wonderful place and felt the spirit of the saints, he dropped to his knees. And the Spirit told him, this is where we will live. And he went down and became very good friends. He became quite the hero because he was able to give valuable information. But George Buchanan just absolutely loved Carl. I've got a great, I've got some cool pictures here. Let's see. Here's one. This is Carl. This is Carl on the left, with George Buchanan right before he goes into prison for polygamy. And he's the one that would take the mail into George Q and give him all the information in the news, visit him every day. He was also kind of a driver for Brigham Young, John Taylor, Wilford Woodruff, and Lorenzo Snow. And he was a constable. He helped Brigham Young build his first mill. He was a miller in Germany. He was trained as a miller. So he built the mill there in Liberty Park and ran the mill. He was also a constable, and being in that position, he was able to bribe some people who knew beforehand when they had warrants to arrest polygamists. He would be able to warn those people early. One time they had a warrant for 43 different polygamists, and they didn't catch a single one. Who knew? You know? And it was because of Brother Wilkin. And I just think that's a marvelous... listen, I don't know if any of you have done this before, but did you know that if you go to their names, watch this, you go to their names and you push this like their birth date, you just tap that and watch what happens. It finds it on the map. It's so cool. Now I'm going to push that map and let's see what happens. Isn't this cool? It goes, he went up there, was born up there, came back down, and then it's going to keep going. He goes from Germany, and he sails over to New York, comes into Salt Lake with the Saints, goes down to Lehigh, or I guess down into Salt Lake, goes over to Heber for a year or two, goes back on a mission back to Germany and picks up a lot of his family. His wife came over later, but he converted a lot of his family. And then he ended up going down the Delta, and then back up the Salt Lake, and it even tells you where he's buried. Isn't that cool? I just think that's one of the neatest little things. And I hope each of you just have fun when you do this, you know? Here's Parley P. Pratt. Watch what happens when I do it with him. Okay, here's Parley P. Pratt, born up in New York, I think. Watch what happens. Boom. That's all it does. He goes to Arkansas and gets killed by an irate ex-husband of a wife. But
Is this in memories or Family Search?
this is in Family Search. Under yeah, off the pedigree chart. Yeah, this is just part of. You just pull up the name. It's in the vitals. You know that there's a lot more to Parley P. Pratt than just going straight to Arkansas and getting shot. Remember, he did a mission up in Canada. He converted John Taylor, right? He did a lot of missions back over in England.
The very first one
Yeah,
settled landed in Kirtland.
yeah, incredible. And he baptized a whole town. I mean, he is the missionary that brought thousands of people into the church in the very first year or two of the existence. And what an incredible apostle he was. But all I'm saying is there's a lot more to it, and there's more things that we need to be entering into this that's not in there. That's what I'm getting at. And so I hope each of you take the opportunity to play around like that. Brothers and sisters, I think that's about as far as we need to go. I just want you to know that genealogy is important, but more than that, I wrote a cool little saying down that I think I want to say. Edmund Burke said that people will not look forward to posterity who never look backwards to their ancestors, right? If you truly care about your children, you will understand your past and share it with them. Help them understand where they came from. Give them a heritage that's, and regardless, if they understand the person, almost every one of our ancestors were noble. They made decisions because they thought it was the right decision. I don't know, I guess we all have horse thieves once in a while, but let's not concentrate on those. Let's concentrate on those that do wonderful things. And write your personal histories. Each one of you should have a page or two. You know, you go over here to memories, you know, and you should have stuff like this. You should have pictures. You should have a 1 or 2, 3 page autobiography of your life posted on Family Search. And if not there, please bring it to our library at national headquarters. My wife is one of the ones that's in charge of memorializations. Each one of my ancestors, I want to make sure that they're memorialized. I think, and it doesn't have to be a big thing. It's a few pages, and we send it to national. They digitize it. They put it on this website. We have 4 different time periods for memorializations. Before the railroad, 1847 to 1869. Then before statehood, which is 69 to 96, right? January 4, something like that?
96.
And then 96 to 1933, and then when SUP started in 1933 to present. But any one of those, we can memorialize our grandparents, we can send something in for ourselves. I would love to have something on every member of SUP. Wouldn't that be incredible? And have that record for anyone who comes and does research. We are digitizing every book at the library. We are now, I think as of this week, we are now a genealogy library for Family Search. And we're hoping to become a discovery library. It's fantastic, and it's going to bring a lot of people in. We need volunteers. This is one reason why I've come. The library needs volunteers to be to get your chapter of excellence. One of the things they would like you to do, it's one of the choices anyway, is volunteer up at the library, either in person or if you want to do some stuff online, we have things that you can do there. But call National, say I've got an hour this week. and they will give you a project that would make this really fun. And we have thousands and thousands of books that we need to know the topic, who the leading characters are, so that in our indexes, people know which book to check out. Things like that. That's research that each of us need. We have thousands of pictures that we need, I'm sorry, but we need older people to come look at these pictures and see if they recognize anything about them. I mean, thousands, but that's something you need to go there, look at the pictures and say, I think I know what this is. You know, let's get them labeled, get this stuff digitized. Cool projects, really fun stuff that I think would be fun. I know that people are in this organization not to waste their time. You want lives of purpose. Genealogy is that. And the work that goes on because we know our ancestors is something that extends not just beyond us, but we do work for those who have gone before us. And I know it's a sacred work. I hope each of you get that bug inside you. My last comment is we are a continuum. Just as we reach back to our ancestors for fundamental values, so we, as guardians of that legacy, we must reach ahead to our children and their children, and we must do it with a sense of sacredness. I bear my testimony that this is the Lord's word, and we have a sacred trust to preserve this heritage for our children. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much. Let's give him a big hand for his presentation. So thank you for coming tonight and sharing that message with us. We appreciate it very much. I wanted to take this opportunity to remind each of you, next month in December, we will be meeting on the 19th, because once again, we don't want to be holding our meeting on Christmas Eve. And I don't make it Christmas, actually, on Christmas. So it'll be on the 19th. It will also be at the Senior Center in Murray, and we will have the Taylorsville High Madrigals coming again. They put on such a fun program, and we would love to see each and every one of you there. You're more than welcome to come if you'd like. We'd love to have you. Enjoyed you very much tonight. And does anyone have anything they'd like to say before we close the meeting tonight? Okay, we're sure glad to have had you here, and I think we were well taught. Quentin Wells will be saying our closing prayer.